as Democrats have come to feel less threatened in their political situation as they look forward to the demographic changes that they believe will make them the majority party for decades to come, their enthusiasm for Clintonian triangulation seems week by week to be lessening, and they seem to be reverting to the non-judgmental posture of saying that compassion requires helping people who need it, and not asking these intrusive, mean-spirited questions about whether or not they are working hard, whether or not they are playing by the rules.
Well, you have some very interesting things to say about the origins of compassion. In some ways, you paint a picture of the philosophical development of the West in the last couple of hundred years, which is a complicated and long picture we can't go into the details of. However, you do say that compassion is, you make this interesting argument that compassion is a way of responding to the collapse of Christianity in the modern West, and that it is one of what you regard as sort of three possibilities for filling the moral void left by post-Enlightenment Christianity. Say something a little bit about that. Why compassion now?
Yeah. Saying a little bit about it will be a challenge, but let's give it a go. Sort of the modern bargain is that the understanding that people had for thousands of years prior to the past 200-300 was that a society could only cohere, and an individual life within it could only be meaningful and dignified and satisfying in the context of a shared moral and teleological understanding, a widely held, elaborate, comprehensive, often very exacting sense of what it meant to live well and what to live for. That this is how people live together. In the wake of the intellectual progress made by modern philosophical thinkers, Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, and also the facts on the ground, the ferocious wars of religion between Protestants and Catholics that devastated Europe, there was receptivity to the idea that perhaps this shared understanding could be attenuated to a great deal, and really needed to be. That instead of people all sharing the same, worshiping the same God in the same way, having the same moral code, if people simply signed a mutual non-aggression pact and agreed to disagree about these big questions.
Live and let live.
Yes, that's right. That society would prosper, that the resulting domestic tranquility would permit the flourishing of the arts and commerce, and people would be so much better off that they could still privately worship however they wanted to, or not worship if they wanted to. And this would sort of, as a public matter, be of no concern whatsoever. The problem seems to be that, again, this I think goes back to the way people are wired, that it turns out, some 3 centuries into this experiment, that people don't seem to have the courage of their lack of convictions. There remains a ineradicable longing for life to have meaning. There remains a sense that people cannot be trusted to live together agreeably, peacefully, to keep to the terms of this bargain without some moral support for it. And so there has been almost with as soon as modernity was established, there has been a quest to rephrase one of James Madison's lines, a modern solution, a modern remedy for the illnesses incident to modernity. One of these, the most appalling, has been totalitarianism, a theocracy without a theology. People were supposed to find meaning and dignity in their lives by connecting to a secular crusade, whether for the master race or the proletariat. The horrors of the 20th century have, we hope, disabused most people for a long time of the desirability and feasibility of this. The other two alternatives are, one favored mostly by American conservatives, which is to trust self-interest well understood, as Tocqueville called it, or two, as liberals are inclined to do, to treat compassion as the basis on which we can have sort of have our cake and eat it too. We can have modernity, but we can have the additional things that modernity sort of denies us.
So is compassion then, in your view, essentially secularized Christianity?
Well, that word essentially is, I would say that in large part, let's say, much of what makes it go.
Or it begins as that, maybe.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I would agree with you in this way. If you go to, if you're living on the streets and you go to a Salvation Army soup kitchen, you'll be fed. But first you have to sit down and sing a couple of hymns and hear a sermon. The idea is that the compassion of the devout Christian does not simply extend to alleviating suffering, but to a more profound effort to turn lives around, to uplift, to dignify, and that this simply seeing that the hungry are fed is in a sense not enough. In the eyes of the devout believer, in a way that's contemptuous. It treats people as if they were, it makes no difference between attending to a sick person and giving money to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals.
Yes.
The older understanding was that, the pre-modern understanding was that compassion is necessary to uplift and dignify the entire person, not simply in his bodily needs and suffering.
So you could say compassion had to be connected to something else.
Yes.
I mean, to justice or to some idea of the common good or of noble action or noble character. It's not
a connection of what it means, a life well lived.
Right. Empathy was not enough.
Yes, but under the modern dispensation, we are required to say, well, who am I to judge? Who's to say whether sleeping in a cardboard box is any better than working hard to live in a nice house? And therefore, rather than get judgmental and critical and make people who are already suffering feel even worse about themselves by pointing to ways that they could improve their lives, to turn their lives around, we are simply going to be compassionate without asking questions or delivering any sermons. We are going to run a soup kitchen where we feed people who are hungry, full stop. Nothing more to it than that. No sermons, no hymns, no judgments. And in this way, I think the idea is that compassion takes what was best from the pre-modern understanding, but breaks it away from what was most in the eyes of moderns, most problematic about it.
You have a nice term in your book. You say that modern compassion or liberal compassion is mushy-headed. And by that you seem to mean that there isn't a theory or a sort of a set of judgments, moral judgments that go with it. It likes to confine itself to feeling bad when people are feeling bad, although there is very much an imperative to do something about it.
Yes.
So say something about that. Where does theory come in, or where do the reasons of liberalism come into its pity?
Well, I think on this point, liberals try to have it both ways, in that they proceed as though it were impossible, futile, ugly, and impermissible to speak to the suffering as though they were moral agents, as though they were things that suffering people could do differently that would change their lives. But they are, liberals are, have no such reluctance to speak to people who might help the suffering about their moral obligations. And I don't see how you can have it both ways. If people have the capacity to be better than they are, to turn lives around, to be better, in the sense of being more compassionate, then they probably also have capacities in the sense of being more provident, disciplined, farsighted, self-controlled. So to say that who am I to judge does not extend to the question of judging people who are insufficiently compassionate.
And
so that's a problem.
Is there a difference within liberalism on this? I mean, if you think back to Bill Clinton or to Democratic Leadership Council liberalism, to neoliberalism as it was once called, to sort of the moderate sect within modern liberalism, there was an attempt, wasn't there, to sort of move towards opportunity, responsibility, to add some judgments and some moral reasoning to just feeling bad about people who are feeling bad. Is that an ongoing effort to bolster liberalism, or was that tried and essentially abandoned?
Again, who knows what lurks in the human heart. But it seems that this was an accommodation to a political reality rather than a fundamental conviction. Liberals realized that they had an electoral problem in that they were coming across as indiscriminately generous, throwing taxpayers' dollars around.
With other people's money.
With other people's money, yes. And so there was a sort of a public relations need to address this problem. So when Bill Clinton was saying in the 1990s that he wanted to make sure that everyone who worked hard and played by the rules made out well in life, the implication was that it was okay not to care or to care less about people who didn't work hard or play by the rules. But I think
so welfare reform, for example, work requirements were added. Yeah.
But as Democrats have come to feel less threatened in their political situation as they look forward to the demographic changes that they believe will make them the majority party for decades to come, their enthusiasm for Clintonian triangulation seems week by week to be lessening, and they seem to be reverting to the non-judgmental posture of saying that compassion requires helping people who need it, and not asking these intrusive, mean-spirited questions about whether or not they are working hard, whether or not they are playing by the rules. So I think that as with so many things with Clintonism, it's impossible, even 14 years now after he left the White House, to really know how much was a prudential accommodation to a difficult political situation and how much was genuine conviction. But my suspicion is that the dominant strain within liberalism, which pushes against this idea of being judgmental, is growing more and not less dominant as time goes by.
But we may not have seen the last of the Clintons.
We may not have, but the triangulation that President Hillary Clinton would do, I think it looks like it's going to be very different from the triangulation that Bill Clinton was doing in the 1990s. She is going to have to propitiate her left flank much more than he did.
Mm-hmm.